Welcome back to Wake Up with Nubian Tigers Talk, a podcast brought to you by a group of Black Princetonians. Our podcast discusses issues that impact real Black communities. My name is Michelle Jacobs, and I'm here with my co-host, Ray Smalls. So, Ray, during the quarantine and the pandemic, there was a lot of news attention to the activities of athletes who were building on the work that Colin Kaepernick started several years ago when he knelt down during the anthem. And the athletes were really particularly active this year in the elections and all kinds of things. Black Lives Matters. But there were also some issues around the health of athletes as pro sports and the college sports decided that they were going to continue their seasons despite the fact that the pandemic hadn't ended. Then we got notice of the death of Vincent Jackson, a former football player. And the questions were swirling around what caused him to die in that particular way at that particular time.
Yeah, I mean, and he's only one of just a crazy, Michelle, number of well-known, especially football players. I mean, people like Andre Waters and Junior Seau and Dave Dewison and guys who were really excellent football players and just terrific athletes, but people just started taking their own lives. And, so much of this is because of all of the years of concussions, early dementia, early Alzheimer's, and just mood swings and depressions that, some of them they couldn't get out of it. But, in thinking about that, and because of the large number of athletes, especially football players that have passed away, we thought it'd be a good idea to explore the many health and wellness problems that retired athletes suffer from after their careers are over. So in 2014, there was an initiative that was launched entitled the Football Players Health Study at Harvard University, because, we have to keep it in the Ivy League, right, Michelle? We got to keep it Ivy League. And that is
Harvard says we should study it, everybody will study it.
That's right, exactly. And that's a comprehensive research program dedicated to addressing the health and well-being of former NFL players. And today on our podcast, we are really fortunate to have two of the advisors who are affiliated with this particular study, Dr. Herman Taylor and Dr. Ross Zafanti. Dr. Zafanti is a principal investigator for the study and the Earl P. and Ida S. Charlton Chair of the Department of Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation at Harvard Medical School, as well as the VP of Medical Affairs at Spaulding Rehabilitation Hospital, and Chief of Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation at the Massachusetts General Hospital. Dr. Taylor is Director of Player Engagement and Education for the study. He's a cardiologist, an epidemiologist, and current endowed chair and director of the Cardiovascular Institute of the Morehouse School of Medicine. In his career, he's developed a research background on coronary disease, treatment disparities, where he's shown the underutilization of invasive procedures, delay in treatment, and a higher frequency of misattribution of angina symptoms to non-cardiac etiologies among minority patients. And Michelle, I had to really spend time learning all those words.
I'm sure you did. and no one knows what they mean, but it's
that's
okay.
Right. Yeah, that's okay. But even more special about Herman, he's a Harvard Medical School grad. He's a fellow Princeton Tiger class of 76. And he and I were on the radio station WPRB together. That's when I first met Herman.
Well, welcome, gentlemen, to the show. We're so happy to have you, and I know it's going to be a fascinating discussion.
All right, so welcome to Dr. Taylor, Dr. Zafanti, and gentlemen, I'm going to call you by your first names if you don't mind. All right, that'll be nice and folksy. Well, so can each of you share with our listening audience how you guys became involved with this study, and how do you go about trying to recruit ex-football players to participate with you?
So I'll start, but Herman will have the more cogent comments. I was there at the initial idea about this. And so what happened is there was a research funding proposal. We said, what could this be? How can we bring all of the forces of Harvard for good? How can we bring all the schools of Harvard together for good? And why we were so interested in professional American style football players is not only because they're famous people, and that's of course somewhat interesting. It's these are the young people, these are the folks who were fitter than everybody else. They were the 1% of the 1%. They were the remarkably gifted. So why are they having all of these problems? And we thought about this as something simple, which is how do we understand a life in football and what that means in both the challenge and maybe some of the benefit?
Yeah, and then Ross and his team at that time, importantly including Lee Nadler, who is a dean at Harvard, approached me because of my experience with pulling together a group of individuals who were a special population that had beset with special problems. I'm a cardiologist by training, and the special problems under study included excess cardiovascular disease among African Americans. Now, the commonality between what Ross was attempting to do back then and what I had just done was at least twofold. One, you're dealing with a population that has every reason to be reluctant to participate in research, right? In the first case, it was African Americans in the South. Anything back then, we started that in 2000. When you approached many African Americans in the South about being a part of a research study sponsored by the government, that was like a non-starter for a lot
I'm
of
sure
people.
you got a lot of ugly looks, right?
But for the fact that we were, I think, wise enough, and I'm including a lot of people on the ground in Jackson, Mississippi, wise enough to start by talking to the people we intended to help, not approaching this as ivory tower experts arriving with the answers and the approaches that'll be most important. We talked to the people who actually were suffering, and Ross and the leadership team wanted a similar approach. They had similar sensibilities and sensitivities. So we found common cause in approaching the football players with a similar approach.
And if I might, Hervin is being modest. He was a critical early part of our thinking about this, but some people call it participatory action research or involving the community that's of interest. You can start to identify something over here, but if it has no real meaning to the community, it's not that valuable. It's only so valuable. And we were really blessed because we've had an extraordinary advisory board made up of former players and extraordinary communication with them about, hey, this is really important. This is really what happens. You can't ask that kind of question. Ask it this way. So in some ways, we almost had an insight into what was both of value and how to approach it.
So that's interesting, because that brings us to the next question Michelle and I had for you guys, and that is, you do something really unique with the study. You involve families in the study, and families are part of your wives, moms, siblings. They're part of your study group. So was that out of Herman, your community engagement thought process?
It very much a part of that. I mean, it's that type of again approach that we found most important. Football is not a solitary journey, right? It impacts families from the time of Pop Warner playing as an 8-year-old, sometimes even younger, all the way to the pros if people are fortunate enough to make it that far. I mean, you see some of that in evidence on special days like when kids are drafted. You see the family pictures and everybody, a whole entourage, is cheering and happy and ecstatic. and and mom shows up to help carry off the Heisman Trophy and things like that, and other special. But from start to finish, it's a family affair, and I think we get better insights when we are inclusive, and recognize that the player, it's not a solitary journey at all.
No, I agree with Herman. And, we wanted people's spouses, but also their moms involved, because it's a life, right? It's a life in football. What did they give up? What did they observe? And, as a person who sees a lot of former players clinically, it's important to get a family's insight. And it's important to get a family's insight on so many of us, to say, he says he has no pain, but you're seeing him take a half an hour to go up the stairs. What does that really mean?
Exactly.
Yeah, and the wives and mothers are going to be more truthful.
Actually, I agree totally, Michelle.
There's a lot to that. Ross and I, we would see it even outside of sports. You can the classic interview with decorated veterans we see in the VA hospital system is you ask the veteran a question and he'll get one answer. Then you look over at the wife and she's shaking her head, or she wants to amend the answer. She wants to give us the real truth. So
right, and that's one of the very negative impacts, right, of having a culture that's wrapped around masculinity, where you can't acknowledge any kind of weakness, because it's going to impact the image of your manliness.
Michelle, I think that's a great point, but we also have to remember that many of these gentlemen are always competing for a job. And if you have any threat to that being like your wellness or your hurt or other things, it even provokes more anxiety. And so we have a lot of these unfortunate messages intersecting.
You call that intersectionality.
Yeah, no, I mean, these guys, for the time that they're professionally involved, their ability to project, invulnerability almost at every turn, or at least, a superior state of readiness is very important for their livelihood and their continued viability in a sport that has a lot of rewards, while you are a professional player.
Yeah. So, I was going through some of the reports on the website. And since your specialty is cardiology, Herman, I wanted to ask you, there was one report that showed there was a difference in cardiac health depending on what position the player had spent his career in. So I was hoping you could talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's intriguing, and some of it is, I guess, not terribly surprising. So you're speaking of the difference between what we designated as linemen and speed players, if you will, and the guys who are the speed athletes. The defensive backs, the receivers, even guys like quarterbacks and kickers generally have better cardiovascular health overall than the linemen. Some of that, I say, is probably predictable if you just look at what a lineman is and what he does, right? First of all, they are, they tend to be very big people, right? And over the years, just being big and strong has become not enough. They have to be outsized, whereas back when Ray was playing, a lineman could be 220, 230 pounds and considered sizable. Today, that person would not even make the cut.
Herman, I was 210 pounds when I had ambitions of playing on the football team. Okay. And that was after 3 square meals a day.
Right. And the encouragement, that I recall, even back in those days, or that the linemen were to beef up at any cost, really. Just keep eating, eat raw meat. I remember one coach saying, just keep the calories coming. And on top of that stress and strain, and the metabolic changes that can have things like cholesterol and blood pressure. On top of that, the way they train is extraordinary and dependent upon moving massive amounts of weights, isometric focused exercise that really, and one of our colleagues who's a leader in the study has documented this in college players, really puts a special type of strain on the heart, causes the heart to stiffen a little bit. It doesn't relax quite as well as it should. And unfortunately, during the off season, when you're detraining, the heart doesn't recover entirely, even in college. So as you pile this up, not in every case, but you can see how that would increase the chances that bad things could happen. So and on top of that, because of their size and other related things, there's a high prevalence of things like sleep apnea, which only aggravate the situation, right? So there's a real accumulation of risk in the linemen that puts them at a higher risk than the players who are much more aerobic in what they do on the field, and who also maintain closer to ideal body weight. That doesn't mean linemen are doomed. I mean, there are a lot of guys we know who get out of the league, who lose weight, who really attend to their physical well-being very well and do well. But clearly, being a lineman is associated with excess cardiovascular risk compared to other positions on the field.
Now, Ross, in our pre-talk, you shared the trajectory of the weight gain over the years. So I'm wondering if you could just share, because it was astounding when we heard it, and I would want our listeners to know that as well.
Sure. Ross, you want to jump in?
Sure. I think Herman poised it well. I mean, I think when you go back into the 1960s or even the late 70s, there are offensive linemen who are in the 240s. And now an average Southeast Conference college, let alone the pros, you're talking about gentlemen who are 328. That's another human being. So what did we do? And what did we do, as Herman said, by adding all of that early life weight gain, which our studies have shown may not be so healthy for people. Now, Herman brilliantly brought up the cardiac issue, so I won't go there. But, having hypertension and all of that other risk from your heart isn't good for your brain, because they taught us these two were connected. And let me give you one other. Weight isn't very good for your joints. And so if I take 1 pound off, it's 4 pounds off my knee. So think about 100 pounds more on somebody. That's a lot.
Right.
Oh, Ross, my wife is going to want to have a long conversation with you.
But that would help explain why, sometimes in the show we get these little pieces of information that make other just regular things understandable, like the reason why people who have obesity issues tend to have knee surgery, right? Because their joints are carrying too much weight for them to be able to sustain it. So that's interesting to me.
And Michelle, the other thing that Herman had mentioned, the weight training, it's when these guys, and I just recall, from doing my weight training, when they ask you to get underneath a barbell with 350 pounds of weight on it and do 15 squats, right? Well, it's may not be a big deal when you're a young man at 21 or 22, but now add that on to the number of years you've been in the league and playing and what have you. And I can't imagine what that stress must be like. I know what it feels like on me, because I have one knee replacement and the other one is ready to go. So,
well, you're right, Ray. I mean, and again, if you guys leaf through some of this literature, in addition to what Ross has published, Aaron Baggish, who's on our team, as I mentioned before, has found that, not only does the heart get bigger, you'd expect that for athletes who have to perform at these high levels. But if you add the weight training on that the linemen do, the heart gets stiffer, right? And a stiff heart that doesn't relax in between beats is a heart that could be on a trajectory for some significant problems down the road. Again, added to that, the cholesterol, the blood pressure, the sleep apnea, and then what guys are forced to do to manage pain day in and day out, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whether that's non-steroidals, which aren't the best for your blood pressure and your kidneys, particularly if you're taking it in massive amounts, which sometimes they are compelled to do because they can't get out of bed or they can't, function. It becomes a really kind of toxic mix of things that people have to cope with in the post-playing years. Now we're talking about, like everything, there's a distribution. There are people who are doing extremely well. They're the Jerry Rices of the world, right? And then you have people who are just shockingly crippled and impaired. And one of the main thrusts of the study, and that's why it brings together all sorts of specialists under Ross's leadership, brings together all sorts of specialists, is to try to figure out, what are the forks in the road? What are the things that determine whether someone will be highly functional and intact versus somebody who has a very different course? And to the extent that we can sort of ferret it out, we can advise and counsel in terms of what changes may be necessary for the future of the sport that, is America's sport.
And we will conclude our conversation about America's sport as it relates to the health and well-being of its retired players with Drs. Ross Zafanti and Herman Taylor, both of the Football Players Health Study of Harvard University, on our next episode of Wake Up with Nubian Tigers Talk.
If you enjoyed what you heard today, visit our website, nubiantigerspodcast.com. In addition to the podcast, we also post a resource page for each subject to provide additional sources of information. Follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @NubianTigers, written as one word. We're on YouTube on the Nubian Tigers podcast channel. Have a favorite podcast service? Well, we're probably on it, so just subscribe and look for us under Nubian Tigers Talk. Looking forward to sharing some knowledge with you next time.
Wake up, wake up, wake up.